Welcome to episode 84 of the Loane Hockey Podcast. For today, we're going to be talking about yesterday's matchup between the Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues, where St. Louis was able to have a 3-2 victory over the Hawks. And a lot of the Hawks' top players stood out in this game. And I wanted to talk about some standouts on both sides. And we'll start with St. Louis, though. I thought Dylan Holloway has been a player who's really stood out throughout the entire preseason. He had 2 goals yesterday. He was really good, really engaged in line rush scenarios, transition offense, being able to create in terms of his puck skill and being able to manipulate defenders. And Holloway really stands out with his speed. That's the biggest element in terms of his foundation within his game is his speed, and his game is built upon his speed a lot. And so he was really good in that sense. He was really good all over the place and all over the ice. And then Nick Leddy was a really good puck moving defenseman. He's been a veteran around the league for a very long time. And with Nick Leddy, you're getting a very stable, not necessarily offensively oriented, but shut down and more of a shutdown style defenseman who can play defensive minutes and can play sometimes top four situations and PK situations. So here's another player that stood out. Another player, actually both brothers were Matthew Joseph and Peter Olivier Joseph, and now both in St. Louis together. They both stood out. Pierre Olivier has been a defenseman who's been around the league for a little bit now and good puck mover and really built his game at Pittsburgh and has become a better two-way offensively oriented defenseman. And his puck transporting ability has been quicker as he's adapted to the AHL and NHL. And his ability to make decisions with pace has really stood out over time. And another player that really stood out on St. Louis's end was Alex Texier, obviously the former Columbus Blue Jacket. And he's a guy who can be a solidified middle six slash top six complementary winger who can play with skill, he can play with flair, he can play with speed, he can play with tenacity, and he can play with forecheck ability. So he can play in a lot of different situations in terms of being able to also play defensive minutes when necessary, but more relied upon offensively in terms of his skill set, his ability to generate offense, and his ability to generate plays. Alexei Toropchenko, another forward that stood out. He's a big forward. He's, I believe, 6'6". And what I really like about his game is he's somewhat similar stylistically to Val Nichushkin in a sense, and obviously Russian power wingers. But at the same time, what I like about Toropchenko's game is his game is built on puck protection and not necessarily speed, but more so on the puck protection side and being able to leverage body position, being able to leverage his strength. And so with Toropchenko, you're getting a guy who can really be strong on his feet. He's really strong with how he handles the puck. He's really strong with how he keeps the puck tight to his body, but also in a larger radius of space so he can protect pucks from a larger distance. So that really helps him maneuver in a lot of different situations. And Dalibor Dvorsky, who was a first rounder of St. Louis back in 2023, he's good with his speed. He's good with his two-way play. Can play center, can play wing, and has some time in the SHL. And he could potentially fill in a role with St. Louis this year. And it's more dependent on how he's able to play and how he's able to translate his style. And then for the Hawks, Taylor Hall is really good. He looked really good as a playmaker, 2 assists and 3 shots. And Taylor Hall is really moving the puck well. He's really moving inside the ozone well. He looks healthier, and he looks like he could be a player who could be productive for the Hawks this year. And ironically, the guy that was formerly in St. Louis, Patrick Maroon, was playing yesterday, and Patrick Maroon really stood out. He had 1 goal, and he stood out in terms of physicality. Naturally, you always notice his physicality, his ability to compete and generate turnovers, force turnovers off the forecheck, be able to be a threat in those situations, and obviously a physical presence. And Philip Kershaw was really good, 2 points, goal and assist, and stood out in terms of his ability last year to play with Bedard, to be a complementary winger to him when necessary, and he was really good. And he could very well have another big season. He had, I believe, 50-ish points last year. So he's in for a potential bigger season this year and could be a very productive player once again for them as well. Isaac Phillips on the back end and Nolan Allen were two similar style puck movers. They're not super offensively minded, but they can activate in the offensive rush. They can activate in transition when necessary. They're more transition defense oriented, so they like to rely on their stick work, their angles, their ability to use their size and physical presence to be able to shut plays down. Andres Athanasiou was playing yesterday as well, showed good speed, flair, and compete at the center position. And Colton Dock, he played last game against Detroit and played yesterday. He was noticeable. He's been a little bit more noticeable in terms of his ability to handle the puck with fluidity and how he's able to absorb contact with the puck on his stick so he can handle and fend off contact really well. And he's really improved at doing that. One of my favorites actually to watch is Ethan Del Mastro. And Ethan Del Mastro, it's because of his ability to engage the offense, but also play a very mature style shutdown game. And he's very mature in his size and his reach in terms of his poise. And he was an AHL All-Star last year with Rockford. And Del Mastro could very well be a guy that slots in the defensive lineup for the Hawks this season. He got a handful of games in last season, including his NHL debut. But this season, he could very well be a very productive top six style defenseman if he's able to get a role defensively. And he's a very productive defenseman in terms of how he's able to utilize his reach, his size, and his foundation and his ability to kill plays and shut plays down. And I noticed a little bit of Ilya Mikheyev. That was his first game yesterday, and he had a little bit of inconsistency in terms of his play at both ends of the rink, but there's more to come from him. Alex Vlasic was the last one I wanted to get to because Vlasic's always been a guy who he always engages in transition. He's always engaged in the ozone. He's really improved at layering his ozone skill set. So he's become a more, I wouldn't say dominant, but he's become more of a threat moving laterally and walking the line, being able to use his puck skill and his feet to be able to walk the line to create offensive chances when he can. And he's become a lot better over time at being able to create sustainability in that sense with that as well.